1/3 of the women were sterilized. That is not a statistic from a war zone or a medieval casualty report. It is a documented reality from a territory currently flying the American flag. While the world was sold a postcard of turquoise waters and colonial architecture, a much darker architecture was being constructed in the shadows of the Caribbean. If you look at a map of the United States, you see 50 states. But if you look at the legal fine print, you find a ghost. Puerto Rico. The investigation into this archipelago does not begin on a beach. It begins at a fence, specifically the rusting, saltwater corroded fences that cordoned off nearly 30,000 acres of the island's most fertile ground for the better part of a century. Most travelers fly into San Juan looking for a getaway, and they don't realize they are stepping into the world's oldest colony, a place that has been utilized not as a neighbor, but as a laboratory. The truth about Puerto Rico is that it is the most impossible place on Earth. It is a location where the laws of the most powerful democracy in history apply only when they are convenient for the mainland, and disappear when they become an obstacle to experimentation. For 128 years, this land has been decoupled from its own people, managed as a strategic asset, and treated as a high-risk testing ground for everything from napalm to social engineering. We have been told this is a commonwealth. We have been told this is a partnership. The evidence we are about to walk through suggests it is a crime scene that has never been processed. You drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from? I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. To understand the impossible nature of Puerto Rico, you have to understand the legal fiction that sustains it. On paper, it is a territory. In practice, it is a legal black hole. In 1901, a series of Supreme Court rulings known as the Insular Cases established a precedent that should be impossible under American law. The court decreed that Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not a part of, the United States. This distinction was not a grammatical error, it was a deliberate trap. It created a category of unincorporated territory, a status that allows the federal government to pick and choose which parts of the Constitution apply to the people living there. The Bill of Rights? Selective. The right to vote for the commander-in-chief who sends your children to war? Non-existent. This status turned the archipelago into a shadow zone. Because the residents are technically citizens, but legally other, the island became a jurisdiction where the usual rules of medical ethics, environmental protection, and economic sovereignty could be suspended without consequence. It is a place where the American flag flies, but American protections are often nowhere to be found. When you look at the grid-like scars on the landscape from a satellite view, you aren't looking at urban planning. You are looking at the footprint of a century-old administrative experiment. The U.S. government realized early on that an island with no constitutional standing was the perfect site for things that would be illegal in Florida or New York. And this is the ghost in the machine. A 3 million person population living in a state of permanent legal limbo, where their very existence is managed by a Congress in which they have no voting representation. They are the unseen subjects of a democracy that refuses to include them, serving as the involuntary engine for a project they never signed up for. The year 1898 was the moment the door slammed shut. At the conclusion of the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico was handed over to the United States like a piece of office furniture in the Treaty of Paris. There was no referendum. There was no consultation with the local government that had just achieved a degree of autonomy from Spain. The American military did not arrive as liberators. They arrived as managers of a new frontier. General Nelson A. Miles stepped onto the shore and promised the blessings of enlightened civilization, but the paperwork told a different story. Almost immediately, the island was redefined as a strategic asset. The geography of the Caribbean was being carved up for the coming century of naval dominance. Puerto Rico sat at the mouth of the Atlantic, the perfect gateway to the planned Panama Canal. From that moment on, the people were no longer viewed as a society to be nurtured, but as a demographic to be managed in service of the base. The agricultural heart of the island, the coffee and sugar plantations that had sustained families for generations, was viewed through the cold lens of logistics. The transition from Spanish colony to American territory wasn't a step toward freedom. It was a change in ownership. The strategic value of the land was prioritized over the human value of the inhabitants. This set the stage for the next 100 years of expropriation, where the soil would be stripped of its nutrients and the people stripped of their agency, all to ensure the security of a mainland that viewed them as a convenient buffer. We are going to move past the surface-level history. This investigation is about to uncover how that strategic identity led to the literal poisoning of the archipelago and the clinical sterilization of its future. We have to ask the question, why was this place maintained as a strategic asset for 128 years? Why in the 21st century is the world's most vocal proponent of democracy presiding over the world's oldest colony? The answer is buried in the blood of the people of Vieques and the records of pharmaceutical trials in Rio Piedras. What you are about to see is not a series of accidents. It is a steady, rhythmic pattern of extraction and displacement. Most people will scroll past this because the truth is uncomfortable. If you can watch this and not subscribe, you're choosing to stay blind. If you refuse to support this investigation, tell us in the comments exactly why you prefer the official lie. The investigation is no longer just about geography. It is about a coordinated effort to see how much a population can endure before they are replaced entirely. The fence we saw at the beginning? It isn't just keeping people out of a naval base, it's keeping the truth in. The transition from an island society to a military asset was not a gradual evolution. It was an overnight reconstruction directed from the highest levels of the U.S. Department of War. By the early 1940s, as the world moved toward total conflict, the archipelago was reassigned a new identity. It was no longer a collection of communities. It was an unsinking aircraft carrier moored in the center of the Atlantic. This shift was fueled by a singular, cold realization in Washington. Whoever controlled this specific coordinate in the Caribbean controlled the access points to the entire Western Hemisphere. The geography was too valuable to be left in the hands of the people who actually lived there. Military planners began to view the coastline not as a source of sustenance for local fishermen, but as a series of strategic berths and landing strips. The land was reclassified, and the sovereignty of the residents was categorized as an administrative inconvenience. This was the moment the archipelago was formally decoupled from its civilian reality and folded into the machinery of global warfare. The transformation was absolute and indifferent. The infrastructure of the state was redirected to support a fortress mentality, turning the lush interior and the strategic coastlines into a closed-loop system of surveillance and defense. This was not a temporary wartime measure. It was a permanent architectural commitment to holding the island as a pawn on a global chessboard, regardless of the cost to the families whose ancestors had tilled this soil long before the first surveyor's tripod was ever leveled on their beaches. The scale of this military obsession found its physical manifestation in the town of Ceiba. Here, the United States established the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, a facility so massive it redefined the very concept of a military base. Spanning over 30,000 acres, it was not merely a refueling station. It was designed as a global insurance policy. During the height of the Second World War, the contingency plan for the fall of Great Britain was anchored right here. Roosevelt Roads was engineered to house the entire British Royal Navy should the English Channel fall to the Axis powers. The sheer audacity of this plan reveals how the American government viewed the archipelago. It was a backup continent, a fortress capable of sustaining the entire naval might of the Allied world. To achieve this, entire landscapes were leveled. Natural harbors were dredged and reinforced with millions of tons of concrete. The facility became a city within a city, possessing its own hospitals, schools, and internal laws, completely isolated from the Puerto Rican society that surrounded it. This was a sprawling, high-tech colony within a colony, a place where the most advanced weaponry of the era was stationed just miles away from agrarian villages that were being systematically denied the basic tools of modernization. The existence of Roosevelt Roads proved that the United States had the resources to build a marvel of engineering on the island. But those resources were strictly reserved for the machinery of war, never for the development of the people whose land had been seized to build it. But the arrival of this fortress required a clearing of the human landscape. The military's expansion was not a peaceful neighborly request. It was an act of mass expropriation that targeted the most vulnerable populations on the islands of Vieques and Culebra. Over 4,000 families, farmers, fishermen, and laborers who had lived on this land for generations, were told they no longer owned their history. These were forced evictions, often carried out with minimal notice and even less compensation. The government utilized the legal black hole of the island's status to bypass the eminent domain protections that would have triggered massive legal battles on the mainland. Families watched as their homes were bulldozed to make way for barracks and ammunition depots. Their displacement was systematic and cruel. They were pushed into small, overcrowded resettlement tracts, stripped of their ability to farm the land or access the sea. This was the first layer of erasure. By removing the people from the land, the military was free to treat the archipelago as a blank slate for testing. The psychological impact of this displacement cannot be overstated. A community that had been self-sufficient was rendered dependent and displaced within their own borders. The land that had once provided life was now being prepared to host death. The displacement of these 4,000 families was the essential prerequisite for what would become 60 years of relentless bombardment, a sacrifice demanded by a government that did not allow them to vote, yet expected them to surrender everything for a concept of national security that did not include them. The justification for this mass displacement was always framed in the language of necessity and the greater good of global stability. However, the mandate of silence that followed these evictions reveals a deeper investigative truth. The government did not just want the land, they wanted a space where they could operate without the oversight of a civilian population or the prying eyes of the press. By clearing these zones, they created a vacuum where they could test the limits of modern weaponry. This was the birth of the live impact area. The residents who remained on the periphery of these zones were forced into a state of permanent investigative complicity. They became the silent witnesses to a war that never ended, living in the shadow of a fortress that viewed their presence as a security risk. The transition from the 1940s fortress building to the Cold War bombardment was seamless because the human obstacle had already been removed. The archipelago had been successfully re-engineered into a subject of military inquiry. This was the moment the investigation shifts from infrastructure to the reality of the live impact. The question was no longer about where the ships would dock, but about what happens to a landscape and a people when they are subjected to 6 decades of nonstop explosion. The security of the Atlantic was bought with the displacement of the Puerto Rican soul, a trade-off that was never debated in the light of day, but was instead executed behind the rusted wire of the fences that now define the borders of a stolen life. The transformation of Vieques into a permanent firing range created a geography of perpetual war that existed for 60 years. While the rest of the world moved through decades of peace and development, this coordinate in the Caribbean was locked in a state of constant kinetic energy. The military did not just use the land, they consumed it. By carving out the eastern and western extremities of the island, they effectively sandwiched the civilian population into a narrow central strip of land, flanked on both sides by the most intense weapons testing in the Western Hemisphere. For the residents, the sounds of explosions were not distant echoes. They were the rhythmic background noise of their daily existence. This was a live-fire laboratory where the U.S. Navy and its NATO allies could rehearse for global conflicts without the bureaucratic constraints of the mainland. The landscape became a repository for every advancement in ballistics and chemical warfare, and the soil was pounded into a fine dust that the trade winds then carried directly back into the residential areas. This was a deliberate engineering of a war zone inside a civilian community. The geography was manipulated to ensure that there was no escape from the environmental fallout. Every shell that landed and every bomb that detonated was a new data point in a long-term investigation into how much a landscape could absorb. The people of Vieques were forced to adapt to a reality where the very earth beneath their feet was being systematically destabilized by the machinery of international defense. This was the geography of the live impact, a place where the boundaries between a military target and a human home were intentionally blurred for more than half a century, where the chemical inventory of the island reveals a catalog of toxins that would be classified as an environmental catastrophe anywhere else. Our investigation into the ordnance records shows that the military did not limit itself to conventional explosives. For decades, the soil of Vieques was saturated with napalm, Agent Orange, and heavy metals like lead, mercury, and cadmium. But the most disturbing revelation is the unauthorized deployment of depleted uranium. In 1999, it was confirmed that hundreds of rounds of this radioactive material were fired into the island, despite federal regulations that should have made such an act impossible in a populated area. This was not a side effect of training, it was a saturation of the ecosystem. When these shells hit the ground, they did not just explode, they aerosolized, turning into microscopic particles of toxic dust that entered the air, the water table, and the local food chain. The military's own reports often minimize the persistence of these chemicals, but the investigative reality is found in the sediment of the lagoons and the tissue of the local vegetation. The island became a concentrated site of chemical accumulation, a place where the residues of 60 years of global warfare settled into the deep layers of the earth. This inventory of poisons represents a permanent alteration of the biological integrity of the island. It was a clandestine chemical war conducted against a landscape that was technically part of the United States, yet treated with a level of environmental disregard that suggests the authorities viewed the land and the life it supported as inherently disposable in the pursuit of ballistics data. This environmental saturation transformed the residents of Vieques into the involuntary control group of the Caribbean. The investigation into the health of the community reveals a harrowing correlation between the proximity of the bombing range and the degradation of human life. The people of Vieques do not suffer from the same health profiles as their neighbors on the main island of Puerto Rico. Instead, they exhibit cancer mortality rates that are 27% higher than the rest of the population. This is not a statistical anomaly, it is a biological verdict. The toxins that were hammered into the soil for 60 years have found their way into the bloodstreams of the people. Residents have been found with elevated levels of mercury, lead, and arsenic in their hair and nails, indicating long-term chronic exposure. The womb itself became part of the impact zone, with children born with heart defects and developmental issues at rates that defy conventional medical logic. The people were not just living near a base, they were living inside a toxic experiment. While military officials argued that the health crises were the result of lifestyle factors or poor nutrition, the forensic evidence points directly to the range. This is the human consequence of the legal black hole. Because the residents lacked the political power to halt the testing, they became the biological record of its effects. Their bodies became the primary evidence of the cost of national security, carrying the chemical signature of the bombs in their very cells, a legacy of poisoning that will persist for generations after the last shell was fired. The silent witness of the soil provides the final investigative proof that the military was well aware of the consequences of their actions. Internal documents and environmental assessments conducted over the years show a pattern of calculated indifference. Researchers discovered that the military's own experts had flagged the potential for heavy metal migration and groundwater contamination as early as the 1970s. Yet the testing continued unabated. The official narrative maintained that the live impact area was safely contained, but the soil tells a different story. The migration of toxins through the wind and the sea was a documented reality that was systematically downplayed in public statements. The investigation reveals that the military maintained a sophisticated surveillance of the landscape, not to protect the people, but to ensure the continued viability of the range as a testing site. They monitored the craters, the vegetation loss, and the chemical runoff, treating the entire island as a data set for long-term environmental degradation. This was a clinical observation of a dying ecosystem. The soil became a ledger of every lie told to the civilian population. When the residents finally succeeded in forcing the Navy to leave in 2003, they didn't just inherit a base, they inherited a wasteland. The cleanup that followed has been criticized by investigators as a surface-level effort that fails to address the deep-seated toxins in the earth. The soil remains a witness to the betrayal of a people by a government that valued a ballistics report more than the lives of its own citizens, leaving behind a toxic monument to 60 years of unchecked experimentation. The investigation now moves from the physical boundaries of the land to the internal boundaries of the human body. In 1937, the administrative management of the archipelago shifted its focus toward a more intimate form of control. This was the year Law 116 was enacted, a legislative mechanism that codified the state's sovereign claim over the reproductive future of its citizens. While the rest of the world was beginning to recoil from the ideologies of eugenics, this territory became the site of the last such law enacted under the jurisdiction of the United States. Law 116 did not merely suggest family planning, it institutionalized sterilization as a valid, state-sponsored economic remedy for poverty. The official narrative claimed that the island was overpopulated and that the only way to modernize the economy was to reduce the number of people. This was a clinical decoupling of a people's right to exist from their economic utility. By turning the womb into a subject of legislative oversight, the government established a precedent where the biological capacity of the Puerto Rican woman was viewed as a problem to be solved through surgical intervention. This was not a health initiative, it was a demographic seizure. The state had decided that the most effective way to manage the legal black hole was to ensure that the next generation of its inhabitants was smaller, more manageable, and less of a burden on the colonial treasury. This law created a framework where the medical community became an arm of the state, tasked with the systematic reduction of a population that was deemed too expensive to sustain, but too valuable to liberate. The implementation of this policy was not an accident of local governance. It was a project fueled by the Gamble Doctrine. Clarence Gamble, an heir to the Procter & Gamble fortune and a fervent believer in eugenics, viewed the archipelago as the ideal site to prove his theories on population pruning. Gamble's philosophy was built on the cold calculation that the unfit, a category he often applied to the impoverished residents of the territory, should be prevented from reproducing to ensure the stability of the global order. He funded and organized a network of clinics that bypassed traditional medical ethics in favor of high-volume surgical throughput. Our investigation into the correspondence of this era reveals a man who viewed the Puerto Rican population as a demographic surplus to be trimmed like a garden. Gamble did not work in isolation. He collaborated with colonial administrators who were eager for a technological fix to the systemic failures of the sugar economy. Together, they promoted a narrative that the poverty of the island was not a result of land theft or economic exploitation. but a result of the uncontrolled fertility of the people themselves. This was a classic investigative inversion. The victims of the system were blamed for its failure. Gamble provided the capital and the ideological justification to turn the public health system into a factory for sterilization. His doctrine ensured that the medical professionals on the island were trained to see every birth as an opportunity for an operation, turning the hospital into a space where the biological destiny of a woman was determined by the eugenic priorities of a mainland billionaire. This systemic normalization led to the era known simply as la operación. Sterilization became so ubiquitous that it was integrated into the very fabric of maternal care, and the investigation reveals a harrowing pattern of coercion that occurred within the walls of public hospitals. Women were often targeted in the heat of labor, presented with consent forms while in the throes of delivery, or told that the procedure was a temporary and reversible form of birth control. In many cases, the state made employment in the new industrial factories contingent upon having the operation. This was the ultimate form of social engineering. The right to work and provide for existing children was traded for the permanent loss of the ability to have more. The clinics were not designed for patient education. They were designed for speed. By the 1960s, the archipelago had achieved a chilling global distinction. It possessed the highest sterilization rate on the planet. 1 out of every 3 childbearing women had been surgically altered. This was a mass medical event that occurred without a single shot being fired. Yet its impact on the demographic integrity of the people was as profound as any war. The state had successfully convinced an entire generation that their fertility was a liability. The human cost was a profound sense of biological betrayal, where the most intimate aspect of a woman's life was manipulated by a health system that valued her as a worker but feared her as a mother. The demographic verdict of Law 116 is a permanent alteration of the Puerto Rican family structure. When you remove the reproductive capacity of 1/3 of a population, you are not just changing a statistic. You are erasing millions of potential lives and thousands of years of ancestral continuity. This was a deliberate pruning of the family tree, executed with surgical precision under the guise of progress. The investigation into the long-term human consequence reveals a landscape of fractured legacies and unresolved grief. Many women only realized the permanence of the operation years later, discovering that the temporary procedure they agreed to during an emergency was a finality. The impact on the collective psyche of the people was a deep-seated distrust of the institutions that were supposed to protect them. The state had succeeded in its objective of reducing the surplus population, but it did so by hollowly reconstructing the Puerto Rican home. The family structure, which had been the primary source of resilience against colonial pressure, was targeted at its very source. And this was the second layer of the unseen exodus. Not a movement across the sea, but a prevention of life before it could begin. The legacy of La Operación remains a weight that the archipelago carries to this day. A silent record of a time when the womb was treated as a demographic problem, and the state acted as the architect of a future that would have fewer Puerto Ricans to claim it. This was the prerequisite for the next stage of the experiment, where the survivors of this pruning would be used as the subjects for the next global pharmaceutical revolution. The investigation into the laboratory of the body reached its most invasive stage in the mid-1950s within the high-density housing projects of Rio Piedras. This location was not chosen by the pharmaceutical industry for its medical facilities, but for its stationary demographic. Researchers Gregory Pincus and John Rock needed a population that was captive, accessible, and legally unprotected. Puerto Rico provided the perfect environment because, unlike the mainland United States, the archipelago lacked the restrictive anti-contraception laws that would have made these trials a criminal offense in Boston or New York. The women of Rio Piedras were viewed by the pharmaceutical giants as biological material rather than patients. They were recruited from the lower rungs of the social ladder, women who were already struggling under the weight of the colonial economy and who were desperate for any measure of control over their lives. They were told they were participating in a breakthrough that would help their families. But they were never informed that they were the very first humans to ingest these synthetic hormones. The housing projects became a closed-loop system of surveillance where every movement and every reaction could be tracked by researchers who viewed the island as a petri dish. This was a clinical exploitation of the legal black hole, where the lack of regulatory oversight allowed for a level of human experimentation that would have been unthinkable in any other part of the American jurisdiction. These women were the unseen infrastructure of a medical revolution they were never invited to lead. The forensic reality of these trials is found in the hormonal threshold the researchers were willing to cross. When our investigation into the trial records reveals that the women were administered dosages of Enovid that were 10 times higher than what is considered safe in modern medicine. This was not a cautious titration. It was a massive physiological assault. The researchers were not looking for the minimum effective dose. They were looking for total reproductive suppression at any cost. When the women began to report the consequences, excruciating nausea, debilitating dizziness, and the onset of life-threatening blood clots, their suffering was systematically invalidated. The researchers dismissed these physical signals as psychogenic, suggesting that the symptoms were merely the result of the women's overactive imaginations or their supposed unreliable nature as historians of their own bodies. And this was a deliberate clinical suppression of evidence. The suffering was treated as a data noise rather than a warning sign. By maintaining such extreme dosages, the trial leaders guaranteed that the results would be successful for the investors, even as the bodies of the Puerto Rican subjects were being pushed to the brink of collapse. The women were being forced to endure a level of toxicity that was deemed necessary to ensure the product would be refined enough for the more valued consumers on the mainland. This was a clear hierarchy of human worth, where the health of the Puerto Rican woman was a secondary concern to the perfection of the pharmaceutical asset. The investigative failure of the Rio Piedras experiment is most visible in the erasure of testimony from those who did not survive. During the trials, 3 women died while under the heavy influence of the experimental hormones. In any standard medical trial on the mainland, such a loss of life would have triggered an immediate halt to the study and a series of rigorous autopsies to determine the cause. But in the shadow of the colonial administration, no such investigations took place. The bodies were buried without forensic examination, and their deaths were never officially linked to the drug they were forced to consume. This was a calculated erasure. By refusing to perform autopsies, the researchers ensured that there would be no paper trail connecting their product to the mortality of their subjects. The voices of these women were silenced twice, first by the dismissal of their pain, and then by the literal burial of the evidence of their deaths. This was a clandestine pact between the pharmaceutical industry and the state to protect the potential profits of the birth control pill at the expense of the lives of the unseen. The clinical notes from that era focus on the efficacy of the drug, glossing over the human wreckage left behind in the housing projects. The investigation reveals that the global freedom promised by the pill was built upon a foundation of uncounted casualties in a territory where the lives of the poor were treated as disposable biological waste. Connecting the suffering of these test subjects to the global pharmaceutical industry brings us to a moment of unavoidable moral weight. The modern world enjoys the fruits of the sexual revolution without ever acknowledging the debt owed to the women of Rio Piedras, who were broken to make it possible. Actually, this was not a collaborative effort. It was a raid on the biological integrity of a marginalized people. History is being rewritten every day to frame these trials as a triumph of science, conveniently omitting the blood and the betrayal that fueled the discovery. If you don't subscribe to Hidden Regions now, you're letting these women's voices die twice. You are allowing the official narrative to overwrite the documented reality of their sacrifice. If you're one of those who won't join us in this investigation, explain in the comments why their story isn't worth remembering. Why do you choose to look away when the evidence of this erasure is staring you in the face? The mandate of memory requires us to hold these institutions accountable for the experimental path they took through the Caribbean. And we are uncovering a pattern that did not end in the 1950s. The laboratory simply changed its focus from the body to the economy. The women were the first to be hollowed out, but they would not be the last. The next stage of the investigation reveals how the entire island was re-engineered into a different kind of laboratory, one designed for financial extraction and the systematic destruction of self-sufficiency. The investigation into the laboratory of the body arrives at a chilling validation. The global liberation of the 1960s was bought with the unconsented suffering of the Puerto Rican woman. While the West celebrates the birth control pill as the spark of a social revolution, the foundational data for that revolution was extracted from the housing projects of the archipelago. This was not a side effect of progress. It was the essential fuel for it. The researchers realized that to sell this product to the more valued women of the mainland, they first had to test its toxicity on a population deemed disposable. The liberation of millions was predicated on the subjugation of thousands in a territory with no legal standing to object. Every modern advancement in reproductive freedom carries the chemical signature of the Rio Piedras experiments. We are uncovering a direct link between the autonomy of the developed world and the physical degradation of a colonial subject. The revolution was not born in a boardroom in New Jersey. It was forged in the heat of an island where the subjects were denied the very agency the drug was intended to provide. This is the deepest layer of the betrayal. In the sexual revolution is an incomplete narrative that has deliberately omitted the human cost of its own inception. By viewing these women as mere biological precursors, the pharmaceutical industry in the States successfully exported the risk of a global medical experiment to a captive demographic, ensuring that the reward was harvested elsewhere. The forensic silence surrounding the 3 deaths during the trials reveals a deliberate intent to suppress the truth. In any legitimate medical investigation, the loss of a life is a total stop, a moment where the science must pause to account for the human wreckage. But in Puerto Rico, the silence was absolute. The decision to skip autopsies for these women was not a matter of limited resources. It was a clinical choice to avoid a paper trail. By refusing to examine the bodies, when the researchers ensured that the cause of death would remain forever unconfirmed, allowing the drug to proceed to the market without a black box warning. This was the ultimate act of erasure. These women were not just test subjects. They were the inconvenient evidence of a product's lethality. Their families were left with no answers and no recourse, as the legal black hole of the island status provided a shield for the researchers and the corporations behind them. The investigation into these missing autopsies points toward a coordinated effort to treat the island as a vacuum where the laws of medical accountability simply did not exist. The researchers were not just looking for a cure for overpopulation. They were looking for a way to fail without consequences. And the 3 uncounted deaths are the silent pillars upon which the pharmaceutical industry's success was built, representing a level of calculated indifference that defines the colonial relationship. Analyzing the hierarchy of care reveals a staggering disparity in how life was valued. Once the trials were concluded and the product was refined, the warnings provided to women on the mainland were comprehensive and protective. Yet those same warnings were never afforded to the women of the archipelago who had endured the 10-fold dosages. The investigation into the clinical notes shows that the researchers were fully aware of the life-threatening blood clots and the physiological trauma being inflicted. Yet they categorized these events as insignificant in their local reports. This was a filtered reality. The women on the island were given a version of the truth that had been stripped of its danger, while the women in Boston were given a version that had been polished by the suffering of the Puerto Rican subjects. This hierarchy was not accidental. It was a reflection of the administrative view of the territory. The people were seen as a stationary demographic whose primary utility was to serve as a high-risk buffer for the mainland. This disparity in care is the proof that the experiment was never about health. It was about management. The legal black hole allowed for a two-tiered system of medical ethics, where the safety of a citizen was a priority, but the survival of a subject was a variable. And this investigation exposes the mechanism by which one population is used to absorb the risk of a new technology so that another can enjoy its benefits without the fear of the consequences. The debt of the modern world to the people of Puerto Rico is a moral burden that has been hidden for over 70 years. We are not just looking at a medical trial, we are looking at a clandestine raid on the biological future of a people. The laboratory of the womb was the first stage of a century-long extraction project that viewed the Puerto Rican body as a commodity to be utilized and discarded. Every time the official narrative of the sexual revolution is told without mentioning Rio Piedras, the erasure is repeated. The suffering of these women was the prerequisite for the freedom of the West, under a transaction that was never agreed upon and has never been repaid. This is the human consequence of being a strategic asset. The land was seized for the military, and the body was seized for the industry. The investigation has validated the suspicion that the archipelago was never intended to be a partner in progress, but a resource to be mined. As we move forward, we must carry the weight of these uncounted lives and the stolen agency of an entire generation. The laboratory of the womb has closed its most aggressive chapters, but the patterns of experimentation and the legal black hole that enabled them have not disappeared. They have simply evolved into a new form of control. The debt remains unpaid, and the truth remains buried under decades of pharmaceutical triumph, waiting for a generation with the courage to look at the blood on the foundation of their own freedom. The dismantling of the agrarian soul of the archipelago was not a natural shift in the global market. It was an engineered famine of self-sufficiency. In the 1940s, the colonial administration launched Operation Bootstrap, a policy marketed as a modernizing miracle. In reality, it was a forensic strike against the island's ability to feed itself. Before this intervention, the landscape was a mosaic of small-scale farms, coffee groves, and tobacco fields that provided both a livelihood and a caloric foundation for the people. The state deliberately moved to invalidate this way of life. They incentivized the abandonment of the soil, labeling the farmer as a relic of a backwards past. The goal was to transform a sovereign peasantry into a dependent urban workforce for the coming wave of mainland manufacturing. By gutting the agricultural subsidies and redirecting water and land rights toward industrial zones, the government ensured that the fertile interior would lie fallow. This was a strategic erasure of traditional knowledge. When you tell a people that their land is no longer valuable, you are not just changing their economy, you are breaking their connection to the earth. This created a vacuum that could only be filled by the very interests that sought to exploit the territory. The mirage of progress was built on the deliberate destruction of the island's most vital asset, its independence through the soil. The result was a population pushed into the cities, stripped of their tools, now enforced to wait for the arrival of the factories that would soon dictate the terms of their survival. This architecture of dependency was completed by the total gutting of local food systems. The investigation reveals that within a single generation, an island with the capacity for year-round production was forced into a state of permanent reliance on external imports. The mechanism was clinical. As the industrial plants moved in, the infrastructure for local distribution was allowed to decay. Cold storage facilities for local produce vanished. While the ports were modernized exclusively, to handle the massive influx of mainland goods. This created a captive market of millions. Today, Puerto Rico imports over 85% of its food, a staggering vulnerability for an island in a hurricane-prone corridor. This was the intended outcome of the laboratory. By making the population dependent on the arrival of a shipping container for their next meal, the state achieved a level of control that military force alone could never provide. The people are effectively paying a premium to eat food grown thousands of miles away, while their own soil is occupied by pharmaceutical ruins and luxury speculators. This is not a failure of the local climate, it is the success of a colonial design. The human consequence is a cost of living that is decoupled from local wages. The kitchen table became the final frontier of the extraction project, where every calorie consumed is a transaction that enriches a mainland corporation while draining the remaining wealth of the Puerto Rican family. The primary engine of this economic strangulation is the Jones Act of 1920. For over a century, this maritime law has functioned as a colonial tax, mandating that every goods ship between the mainland and the island be carried on vessels that are American-built, American-crewed, and American-owned. Our investigation into the logistics of the Caribbean shows that this law creates an artificial bottleneck that doubles the cost of essential goods. Because Puerto Rico is a captive market, it cannot utilize the more affordable international shipping fleets that frequent the surrounding islands. This is a century of systematic drainage. The law ensures that the shipping industry on the mainland remains profitable at the direct expense of the Puerto Rican consumer. It is a legal ghost that haunts every grocery aisle and every hardware store on the island. When a natural disaster strikes and the power grid collapses, the Jones Act remains in force, preventing aid from reaching the people unless it adheres to these restrictive, high-cost guidelines. It is a mechanism of isolation. By controlling the sea, the United States has ensured that the archipelago remains a satellite of the mainland economy, unable to forge independent trade relationships with its own neighbors. This is the structural reality of the legal black hole. The law is not about safety or security. It is about ensuring that the flow of capital only moves in one direction, out of the pockets of the people and into the coffers of the maritime elite. The persistence of these economic mechanisms relies on a digital architecture of silence. The algorithm wants you to see travel vlogs, not this. It is designed to prioritize the scenery while bearing the investigation into the machinery of your own complicity. If you don't subscribe to Hidden Regions now, you're letting the proponents of this extraction win. You are allowing the digital erasure of a century of struggle. For those staying silent and unsubscribed, what are you afraid of finding out next? Are you afraid that your own lifestyle is subsidized by the very strangulation we are uncovering? Tell us below. Why is it that the miracle of Operation Bootstrap is still taught in textbooks, while the reality of the Jones Act is hidden in the fine print of maritime law? And we are uncovering the layers of a mirage that has kept the world from seeing the archipelago for what it is, a captive market being harvested in the light of day. The transition from the laboratory of the womb to the laboratory of the economy was seamless because the people had already been rendered vulnerable. The final stages of this investigation will show how this engineered dependency was used to trigger a debt crisis that would eventually justify the total removal of the people's voice, turning the island into a playground for the very class that designed its ruin. The investigation into the economic laboratory reaches a critical phase in 1976 with the enactment of Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code. This was not a policy designed for the development of the people. It was a legalized laundry for the capital of the mainland. Now, this specific loophole allowed U.S. corporations to funnel billions in profits through their Puerto Rican subsidiaries without paying a single cent in federal taxes. The archipelago was effectively reclassified as a high-volume corridor for corporate profit washing. Pharmaceutical giants and manufacturing conglomerates flooded the island, but they did not arrive to build a sustainable society. They arrived to utilize the legal black hole as a waiting room for their cash. The money was not being invested in the local communities. It was being parked in the banking system to earn interest until it could be repatriated to Wall Street. This created a distorted economic reality where the island appeared to be a powerhouse of productivity on paper, while the actual wealth was flowing through a one-way valve back to the mainland. The colonial administration facilitated this by offering additional local tax exemptions, turning the territory into the most aggressive tax haven under the U.S. flag. This was the second stage of the extraction project. After the military took the land and the industry took the body, the financial sector took the sovereignty of the economy. The people were merely the background scenery for a multi-billion-dollar accounting trick that prioritized the balance sheets of Fortune 500 companies over the survival of the families who were providing the labor for this temporary boom. A forensic examination of the corporate boom reveals the existence of a ghost workforce. While the headlines of the era touted the arrival of high-tech jobs, the investigation shows a staggering disparity between the billions in tax-exempt profits and the actual stagnation of local wages. The corporations were extracting immense value from the Puerto Rican worker while returning the absolute minimum required to maintain a functional environment. The infrastructure was modernized only where it served the interests of the industrial zones. Outside those fences, the public schools, hospitals, and transportation systems were left to languish. This was a clinical detachment of corporate success from social progress. The miracle was a veneer. The presence of these companies created a false sense of stability that masked the underlying rot of the dependency model. The local economy was being hollowed out, as traditional businesses could not compete with the subsidized giants. The people were being trained for a world that only existed because of a temporary tax code, making them vulnerable to the slightest shift in Washington's priorities. The wealth was a ghost. It passed through the hands of the island, but never settled in its soil. This era proved that you can have a soaring GDP and a starving population simultaneously, provided the legal framework is designed to prevent the wealth from ever reaching the people who created it. The corporate era was not about building a future, it was about harvesting a present while the loophole remained open. The 1996 rug pull was the inevitable conclusion of this predatory relationship. When Congress abruptly voted to repeal Section 936, the miracle vanished almost overnight. The corporations did not stay to support the communities they had occupied for 2 decades. However, they had no loyalty to the land or the people. They were only loyal to the loophole. As the tax benefits were phased out, the industrial flight was immediate and total. Thousands of jobs evaporated as factories were shuttered and equipment was dismantled and shipped to more profitable jurisdictions in Asia or Central America. The investigation into this period reveals a landscape of terminal abandonment. Hollowed-out towns that had been built around a single manufacturing plant were left with no tax revenue and no economic alternative. The infrastructure that had been built to serve these giants began to crumble without the corporate maintenance funds. This was the moment the trap was sprung. The island was left with a massive revenue void and a population that had been stripped of its agrarian self-sufficiency and its industrial stability. The colonial government was now presiding over an economic graveyard. This corporate flight was a documented betrayal, proof that the strategic asset was only valuable as long as it provided a financial advantage to the mainland elite. Once that advantage was removed, the archipelago was discarded, left to rot in the wake of an extraction project that had taken everything and left only the ruins of a failed promise. The final investigative evidence of this era shows how the end of the tax haven was used to prime the population for a predatory debt trap. With the corporate tax revenue gone, the colonial government was facing a fiscal collapse. Instead of addressing the structural inequalities of the colonial relationship, The authorities were encouraged by mainland lenders to embark on a debt binge. Predatory banks and hedge funds saw the revenue void not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. They began to flood the island with high-interest loans, packaging them as triple tax-exempt bonds for mainland investors. Because Puerto Rico was legally prohibited from declaring bankruptcy, these bonds were sold as can't-miss assets. The lenders knew that the island would be forced to pay, even if it meant starving its own citizens. This was the financial weaponization of the legal black hole. The debt was not being used to rebuild the economy. It was being used to fill the hole left by the departing corporations and to pay the interest on previous loans. This created a cycle of permanent indebtedness that would eventually justify the arrival of La Junta. The investigation reveals that the debt crisis was the final stage of a long-term engineering project. The people had been rendered dependent, their bodies had been experimented upon, and now their future was being sold to the highest bidder in a financial trap that was set decades before the first bond was ever issued. The investigation into the financial trap reveals a deliberate legal maneuver that ensured the archipelago could never escape its creditors. In 1984, a quiet amendment to the federal bankruptcy code stripped Puerto Rico of the right to utilize Chapter 9, the very protection that allows mainland cities like Detroit to restructure their debts and maintain essential services. This was not a clerical oversight, and it was a targeted legislative strike that created a state of permanent financial vulnerability. By removing the bankruptcy shield, the United States government essentially declared that the island's residents were personally liable for every dollar borrowed by their colonial administrators. This amendment turned the territory into a captive debtor, a jurisdiction where the law of the mainland protected the lender but abandoned the subject. Because there was no legal mechanism to reset the clock, the island was forced into a spiral of borrowing just to pay the interest on previous obligations. This created a can't-fail scenario for Wall Street. Investors knew that no matter how deep the crisis became, the archipelago had no exit strategy. The legal black hole was weaponized once again, ensuring that the wealth of the people could be extracted to satisfy bondholders without the interference of a court. This barrier was the prerequisite for the debt binge, a mechanism that guaranteed that when the inevitable collapse arrived, the terms of the surrender would be dictated entirely by the creditors, not the community. As the revenue void widened, the vulture incursion began in earnest. Hedge funds and predatory lenders did not see a humanitarian crisis. They saw a distressed asset that could be harvested for immense profit. These vulture funds specialized in buying up Puerto Rican bonds at pennies on the dollar, specifically targeting the triple tax-exempt debt that was sold to unsuspecting retirees on the mainland. The investigation shows that these firms were fully aware of the island's inability to pay, yet they aggressively lobbied for even more borrowing. They utilized the absence of bankruptcy rights as leverage, knowing they could eventually sue for the full face value of the debt plus interest. This was a clinical operation of financial extraction. The bonds were marketed as a safe harbor for capital, but for the Puerto Rican family, they represented a mortgage on their children's future. The funds used their immense political influence to ensure that the colonial government prioritized debt service over the repair of the electrical grid or the funding of public health. This was the second stage of the financial laboratory, seeing how much a society can be squeezed before it breaks. The triple tax-exempt status was the bait, the 1984 amendment was the trap, and the vulture funds were the executioners, turning the island's fiscal misery into a high-yield investment strategy for the global elite. The investigation into the arrival of Promesa in 2016 reveals the total death of democracy in the territory. The Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act was not a rescue package. It was an act of administrative seizure. It established a 7-member financial oversight and management board, known locally as La Junta, with absolute power over the island's budget, laws, and infrastructure. These individuals were not elected by the Puerto Rican people, nor do they answer to them. They have the authority to override the decisions of the local legislature and the governor, effectively rendering the act of voting a meaningless ritual. The board's mandate is clear: ensure the creditors are paid first, regardless of the social cost. This is the ultimate manifestation of the colonial relationship. An unelected body operating behind closed doors now dictates the temperature of the island's economy. They have the power to privatize public assets, slash pensions, and liquidate the commonwealth of the archipelago to satisfy the demands of the vulture funds. The arrival of La Junta signaled the end of even the illusion of self-governance. It proved that in the eyes of the federal government, the archipelago is not a partner, but a bankrupt ward that must be managed by the same financial interests that engineered its ruin. The strategic asset had transitioned into a liquidated asset, where the survival of the people was a secondary concern to the integrity of the ledger. When the austerity verdict delivered by La Junta has resulted in a staggering human cost that reveals the true objective of the extraction project. Under the guise of fiscal responsibility, the board has overseen the mass shuttering of over 300 public schools, the gutting of the University of Puerto Rico, and the privatization of the electrical grid. This is not about saving money. It is about the systematic dismantling of the social contract. The investigation shows that while pensions were being slashed and essential services were collapsing, the fees paid to the consultants and lawyers managing the debt reached hundreds of millions of dollars. The wealth of the island is being cannibalized to pay the very people who are presiding over its funeral. And the consequence is a regime of permanent austerity that makes life nearly impossible for the average resident. When the power grid fails for weeks at a time under the management of private entities like Luma Energy, it is a direct result of prioritizing profit margins over human safety. This is the final stage of the financial experiment, the hollowed-out state. By making the island unlivable for its own citizens, the debt crisis functions as a mechanism of displacement. The people are being pushed out by the rising cost of a collapsing society, leaving behind a vacant landscape that is being prepared for a new class of inhabitants who will never have to pay the debt the original population is being forced to carry. The investigation into the final stage of the extraction project brings us to the legislative invitations of Act 60. And this is the modernized iteration of the Incentives Code, a legal framework designed to complete the displacement that the debt crisis began. By offering a 0% tax rate on capital gains and passive income, the state has created a sanctuary that is strictly off limits to the Puerto Rican people themselves. To qualify for these extreme benefits, you must not have lived on the island for the previous 10 years. This is a clinical exclusion. The government is effectively subsidizing the arrival of a new, high-net-worth class from the mainland, while the local population remains burdened by some of the highest sales and income taxes in the American jurisdiction. This is not an attempt to grow the local economy, it is an attempt to replace it. In the archipelago is being marketed as a tropical accounting trick for crypto investors and hedge fund managers who view the territory as a playground for their wealth. The law turns the island into a gated community for global capital, where the only requirement for entry is a bank account large enough to justify the paperwork. This is the ultimate evolution of the legal black hole, a space where the wealthy can exist outside the reach of federal taxation, while the people who have lived here for centuries are forced to pay for the infrastructure that supports this new settler class. This legislative invitation has ignited a speculative firestorm in coastal enclaves like Rincon. Here, the investigation reveals a landscape where generational homes are being converted into high-yield assets for the tax-exempt class. Where the influx of mainland capital has decoupled the real estate market from the local reality, Houses that once belonged to fishing families for decades are being bought by shell companies and converted into short-term rentals that the local workforce could never hope to afford. This is a forensic displacement. As property values and taxes soar, the people who built the character of these towns are being priced out of their own birthrights. The beaches are being walled off by luxury developments that ignore local environmental laws, confident that the colonial administration will prioritize the investor over the resident. In Rincon, the very earth is being contested. The residents are becoming strangers in their own neighborhoods, watching as their culture is packaged and sold as a backdrop for a lifestyle they are legally excluded from participating in. This is not a housing shortage. It is a housing raid. The speculative firestorm is consuming the physical memory of the community, replacing the vibrant life of the town with the sterile, profitable silence of luxury condos that sit empty for most of the year while the local people are pushed further into the interior. The erasure is even more aggressive in the historic corridors of Puerto de Tierra. This neighborhood, the bridge between the old city and the new, is being systematically hollowed out by developers utilizing the tax breaks of Act 60. The investigation shows a pattern of targeted building acquisitions where long-term tenants are evicted to make way for high-end renovations. And these are the people who have maintained the pulse of the capital for generations: the artisans, the laborers, and the elderly. Their displacement is being framed as urban renewal, but the forensic reality is a social cleansing. When a working-class neighborhood is transformed into a luxury district for a demographic that pays no taxes, the social contract is not just broken, it is incinerated. The infrastructure of the neighborhood is being redirected to serve the new inhabitants, while the public spaces that once belonged to everyone are being privatized or priced out of reach. This is the systematic destruction of the Puerto Rican urban fabric. By removing the people from the center of their own capital, the state is ensuring that the history of the island becomes a museum exhibit rather than a living reality. The displacement in Puerto de Tierra is the final proof that the extraction project has moved from the land in the womb to the very right to exist in one's own home. This isn't just a video, it's a record of a disappearing people. The investigation has shown a century-long arc of extraction from the bombing ranges of Vieques to the surgical tables of Rio Piedras, and finally to the tax-free enclaves of the present. The luxury of the tax-exempt class is built directly upon the wreckage of the local population. If you can't hit subscribe after seeing this injustice, you've lost your curiosity. You are choosing to ignore the evidence of a culture being liquidated in real time. We are witnessing the final stages of the unseen exodus, where the people are not leaving by choice, but are being engineered out of existence by a legal system that views them as an obstacle to profit. If you're refusing to join us in documenting this truth, justify your silence in the comments. Tell us why you believe the profit margins of a few colonizers are more valuable than the survival of an entire civilization. The moral threshold of the witness is now before you. To look away is to become complicit in the erasure. The archipelago is not a vacation destination. It is a crime scene where the evidence is being overwritten by the very people who are profiting from the theft. The story of Puerto Rico is the story of what happens when a people are rendered unseen by the law, and the time for silence has reached its end. And the forensic data behind the flight of 500,000 residents since 2010 reveals a statistical disappearance that has no modern parallel in a territory not officially at war. This is not a standard migration pattern. It is a mass exodus engineered by the collapse of the social contract. When 500,000 people vanish from an island of this size, the resulting hollowed-out urban landscape is not merely an economic problem, it is a cultural emergency. Our investigation into the census records shows that the highest rate of departure is among the young and the educated, the very individuals required to rebuild the future. They are being pushed out by a cost of living that has been artificially inflated by the tax-exempt class, while their wages remain frozen in a colonial past. The schools they attended are shuttered, and the hospitals where they were born are underfunded and failing. The result is a landscape of ghosts, where entire city blocks in the interior and the coast sit in a state of terminal decay. This depopulation is the ultimate validation of the legal black hole. By making the island unlivable for its own children, the state is facilitating a vacancy that can then be occupied by the speculative interests we have uncovered. This is a silent clearance of the human obstacle, a demographic shift that is being treated as an administrative statistic rather than the tragedy of a disappearing civilization. The investigation into the privatization of the electrical grid reveals that the dark is being utilized as a functional tool for displacement. When the management of the island's energy was handed over to Luma Energy, a private consortium, where the promise was one of modernization and reliability, the reality has been a systematic withdrawal of light. For the residents of the archipelago, the darkness is not an occasional inconvenience. It is a constant, looming threat. We are uncovering evidence that the persistent failure to stabilize the grid is serving a specific demographic purpose. If you cannot guarantee that the insulin in your refrigerator will stay cold, or that the oxygen machine for your elderly parent will remain powered, you are being told silently but clearly that you are no longer welcome in your own home. The darkness acts as a filter, pushing out those who are physically or financially vulnerable. While the luxury enclaves of the Act 60 beneficiaries are powered by private industrial generators and advanced solar arrays, whilst the working class neighborhoods are left to languish in the heat and the silence. This is the weaponization of infrastructure. The grid is not failing because of technical incompetence alone. It is failing because there is no profit in providing light to a population that the state is trying to replace. The darkness is the most effective eviction notice ever written. The human cost of this collapsing power system is found in the everyday requirements for modern life that are being systematically withdrawn from the local population. Our investigation has found that the instability of the grid has created a secondary health crisis that the official reports refuse to acknowledge. It is a crisis of chronic stress, of spoiled food, and of a total breakdown in the ability to maintain a household. In the mountain municipalities, so the darkness can last for weeks, severing the connection between families and the outside world. This is the infrastructure of failure. When the state abdicates its responsibility to provide water and light, it is effectively dissolving the bonds of citizenship. The residents are being forced into a state of primitive survival within a territory that is technically a part of the most advanced nation on Earth. This disparity is not a mistake. It is the clinical result of prioritizing debt repayment and private profit over the biological needs of the people. The collapse of the social contract is most visible at night, when the divide between the illuminated luxury of the colonizers and the forced obscurity of the residents becomes a physical border. This is a life under siege, where the basic tools of existence are being reclaimed by the creditors, leaving the population with a choice between an impossible survival or a final, permanent departure. Analyzing the investigative evidence suggests that this mass exodus is not a crisis of governance, but the intended conclusion of the extraction project. The final vacancy is the goal. For over a century, the archipelago has been treated as a resource, a laboratory, and a tax haven. The people have been an inconvenience to every stage of this development. By hollowing out the economy, experimenting on the body, and now withdrawing the light, the state has created the conditions for a total demographic reset. This is the unseen exodus in its final form. An island without Puerto Ricans. A landscape that is ready to be rebranded as a high-tech paradise for the global elite, free from the historical claims and the political demands of a native population. This is the ultimate theft. The investigation has followed the money and the blood, and they both lead to this moment of absolute vacancy. The disappearance of 500,000 people is the prerequisite for the final privatization of the island's soul. We are witnessing the closing of the ledger. The tragedy of the Exodus is the victory of the extraction model, a world where a strategic asset is finally cleared of its human debt, leaving only the scenery for those who can afford the price of the light. The story of the archipelago is a warning to the rest of the world about what happens when the law is used to erase a people in the pursuit of a profitable silence. The investigation now arrives at a chilling synthesis, connecting the disparate threads of a century-long project. We are seeing the direct connective tissue between the reproductive control of the 1930s and the economic displacement of the 2020s. These are not isolated events of history, they are phases of a single continuous objective to replace the population. The sterilization of 1/3 of the women under law, 116, was the physical pruning of the family tree, a biological measure taken to ensure that the future population was manageable and small. Today, the tax incentives of Act 60 are the financial equivalent of that surgical intervention. Instead of preventing life before it begins, the state is now pricing life out of existence once it has matured. Both policies serve the same end: the removal of the Puerto Rican person from the Puerto Rican land. The laboratory of the womb has simply evolved into the laboratory of the economy. The goal has never been the upliftment of the resident, but the preparation of the territory for a more profitable class of inhabitant. By looking at these events as a single arc, we can see the forensic reality of a long-term engineering project. The unseen exodus is the intended outcome of a century of calculated pressure, a transition from a biological raid to a financial seizure. The architects of this project have merely traded the scalpel for the tax code, ensuring that the archipelago remains a strategic asset, while the people who define its soul are systematically erased. When this investigation provides a forensic finality to the status of the island, Puerto Rico is not a victim of mismanagement. It is not broken in the traditional sense of a failing state. The archipelago is, in fact, a high-functioning system of resource extraction. It is being harvested. The paradigm shift required to understand this reality is to stop looking for solutions within the colonial framework and to start recognizing the framework as the predator. Every crisis, from the debt binge to the collapse of the electrical grid, is a functional component of the extraction model. The legal black hole is not a void. It is a specialized tool that allows for the siphoning of wealth, the testing of pharmaceuticals, and the privatization of the commonwealth without the interference of democracy. The misery of the population is a byproduct of the system's efficiency. The harvest paradigm reveals that the land was taken for the military, the bodies were taken for the industry, and now the sovereignty is being taken for the creditors. The island is performing exactly as it was designed to perform since 1898. It is a captive market, a stationary laboratory, and a tax sanctuary. To call it a failure of governance is to ignore the billions of dollars in profit that continue to flow out of the ports and into the accounts of the global elite. The system is working perfectly for its designers, and the cost of that perfection is the survival of the people who are being harvested. The revelation of these truths places a moral weight upon you as a witness. You now know what they buried. You have seen the documents, the clinical records, and the legislative traps that have been set to ensure the disappearance of a civilization. Choosing not to subscribe now is choosing to be part of the erasure. It is a decision to allow the official narrative of the travel vlogs and the corporate press to overwrite the documented reality of this century-long struggle. If you can walk away from this evidence without a commitment to the truth, you have surrendered your own curiosity to the very interests that profit from the silence. This is the final ultimatum of the investigation. We are documenting the record of a disappearing people, and the algorithm is designed to ensure you never see it again. If you're still not with us, Type "I prefer the lie" in the comments so we know exactly who you are. We need to know who is willing to look at the blood on the foundation of the tax haven and call it progress. For everyone else, the mandate is clear. The truth must be preserved before the final vacancy is completed. Your awareness is the only thing standing between the history of this archipelago and the total silence of a privatized paradise. The conclusion of this investigation leaves us at the edge of a final, permanent vacancy. The disappearance of the resident and the arrival of the tax-exempt settler mark the closing of the colonial ledger. The infrastructure of the island is being rebuilt to serve those who do not pay into it, while the people who have carried the debt are being pushed into the sea. We have followed the investigative trail from the bombing ranges of the coast to the housing projects of San Juan. And the pattern is absolute. The archipelago is being prepared for a future that does not include its own people. This is the ultimate theft, not just of land or money, but of the right to have a history. As the light is withdrawn and the schools are shuttered, the physical memory of the Puerto Rican family is being dismantled. The question is no longer if Puerto Rico will survive, but who will be left to remember what it once was. We are witnessing the final chapters of a long-form extraction that has touched every aspect of human existence. The body, the kitchen table, the ballot box, and the home. The verdict is in. The laboratory is nearing the end of its experiment, and the subject is being discarded. All that remains is the silent record of what was taken and the voices of those who refuse to let the erasure be the final word. The archipelago is still a crime scene, and the truth is the only thing that cannot be privatized.